Once upon a time. The betrayal in Zawadi's home. In the peaceful kingdom of Tendoji, Kwame, the hunter, was renowned for his bravery and skill. He had long earned the admiration of his people for his talent in the wild, his ability to bring in the catch that kept his village fed and safe. But behind the accolades and admiration, Kwame was hiding a secret, one that no one could have imagined. Deep within the forest, he secretly kept a snake farm, carefully tending to the dangerous reptiles in the shadows. It was a place where his true obsession lay, far from the watchful eyes of the villagers, including his beloved wife, Zawadi. Zawadi, a hard-working woman with a heart full of love, was everything to Kwame. She cared for him and their 5-year-old son, Nia, with unwavering devotion. She worked tirelessly each day to ensure their family's needs were met, often running the household and handling matters that would keep a lesser person overwhelmed. Despite her hard work, there was a quiet sadness in Zawadi's eyes that not even her dedication could conceal. She loved her husband deeply but sensed a growing distance between them. While Zawadi worked from dawn till dusk, Kwame had begun to spend more time in the forest, pretending it was for hunting or other duties. But his true intentions lay elsewhere. He had become enmeshed in an affair with Amara, a woman whose beauty and cunning surpassed even that of Zawadi. Amara, unlike Zawadi, had no concern for family or tradition. Her envy of Zawadi's stable life and her desire for Kwame's full attention fueled a cold, calculating hatred. Amara's resentment of Zawadi's place in Kwame's life was growing. She had always seen herself as more fitting to stand by Kwame's side, believing she could give him what Zawadi could not, a life full of excitement and indulgence. Each stolen moment with Kwame fueled her desire to overthrow Zawadi. She began to weave a plan that would rid her of her rival once and for all. When Zawadi left for a few days to visit her mother's village, a quiet opportunity arose. Amara saw it as the perfect moment to make her move. The kingdom of Tendoji was far from strangers to betrayal, but what Amara was planning was darker than what anyone could have imagined. She would not just take Kwame's heart, she intended to take everything Zawadi had worked so hard for, and leave her in ruins. As Zawadi traveled to her mother's village, she unknowingly left her home vulnerable to Amara's manipulation. This would be a test of loyalty, one that would see the unraveling of what was once a happy family. A sinister plot. With Zawadi absent, Amara wasted no time in asserting her presence in the home she had longed for. She moved into the spacious house, treating it as if it were her own. Every room, every corner, felt like a conquest, her conquest. She took Zawadi's place at the hearth, rearranged the household, and greeted Kwame with a smile that masked her true intentions. In her eyes, she had claimed what was rightfully hers, or so she believed. But there was one thing that remained between her and the life she desired, Nia. The little boy, with his innocent smile and pure heart, was a constant reminder of Zawadi's hold on Kwame. Amara couldn't stand the sight of him. He represented everything she lacked in her twisted vision of the future, a bond between Zawadi and Kwame that was unbreakable, a love she could never destroy by mere manipulation. To her, Nia was a problem, a living obstacle that needed to be removed for her to take her rightful place by Kwame's side. Amara's jealousy began to consume her, and in the depths of her envy, she hatched a dark and sinister plan. She knew Kwame was often tired after his long days in the forest, and it was in these moments of rest that he was most vulnerable to her deception. One evening, as Kwame lay in his chamber, exhausted from his secret excursions, Amara quietly whispered to herself, plotting the fate of the child who was in her way. With the night shrouding the kingdom in darkness, Amara led Nia away from the safety of his home. The child, trusting and unaware of the evil brewing in Amara's heart, followed her without question. They ventured deep into the forest, further than Nia had ever wandered. The air grew colder as they neared the heart of the forest, and soon they arrived at Kwame's hidden snake farm, an isolated, eerie place surrounded by dense trees and a sense of unease. The sight of the snakes, slithering and hissing within their cages, did not faze Amara. In fact, it brought her a sick sense of satisfaction. These creatures, deadly and unpredictable, were her allies in her twisted mission. As she stood at the edge of the cage, she could almost hear the hiss of approval from the snakes themselves. With a cruel glint in her eyes, Amara turned to Nia. She whispered words of malice, a language known only to those who were consumed by hatred. And then, with one swift, heartless motion, she pushed the child into the cage. Nia cried out, her small body tumbling into the darkness, surrounded by venomous serpents. Amara's face twisted with delight, but it was a cold, dead delight. She looked down at the child, now at the mercy of the creatures she had set loose. Without another word, Amara turned and walked away, leaving Nia to face her fate in the dark, snake-filled cage. As she left the forest behind, Amara believed that this was the moment that would solidify her future. With Nia gone, she would have Kwame to herself, he would have no one left but her. Little did she know, the path she had set in motion would lead to far darker consequences than she could ever anticipate. The spirit of the forest intervenes. The cold night stretched on, and deep within the darkened snake farm, Nia lay terrified, surrounded by the slithering serpents. Her heart raced, and her small body trembled as she cried out into the darkness, calling for her mother, her father, anyone who could save her from the nightmare that had befallen her. The snakes hissed ominously, but none struck, their cold, unblinking eyes fixated on the child. Among the creatures, there was one that stood apart from the rest, a massive, mystical white python. Its scales shimmered like moonlight, and its eyes glowed with an eerie, ancient wisdom. The villagers whispered stories about the python, claiming it was the spirit guardian of the forest, a being who had lived for centuries, watching over the kingdom in silence. Its presence was often felt, but seldom seen, until now. The python moved closer, its long body undulating gracefully through the shadows. It could sense the innocence in Nia, the purity of her heart, and it recognized the fear in her eyes. Though the snakes were deadly, the white python was different. It understood that Nia posed no threat, and in an unexpected act of compassion, it wrapped its massive coils around her, sheltering her from the other serpents. Instead of striking, the python shielded her, its body warm and protective. Nia, though still terrified, felt an odd sense of safety in the python's embrace. The serpents surrounding her seemed to retreat, as if obeying the will of their guardian. Nia, exhausted and in shock, fell into a fitful sleep, the python keeping watch over her throughout the night. The next morning, the villagers awoke to a strange sound, an eerie, haunting hiss that echoed through the trees, carrying a sense of foreboding. As the day began to break, a group of them ventured into the forest, drawn by the unsettling noise. They reached the snake farm, unsure of what they would find, only to be greeted by a sight beyond their comprehension. There, in the middle of the snake farm, lay Nia, alive, unharmed, and wrapped gently in the coils of the massive white python. The snakes that once surrounded her now lay calm, their movements slow and deliberate. The villagers stood in awe, unable to understand how the child had survived the night unscathed. The python, though it remained still, seemed to acknowledge their presence with a slow, deliberate gaze, as though it had chosen to protect Nia from the darkness that had nearly claimed her. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Amara was returning to the snake farm, certain that her cruel plan had been successful. But as she neared the place where she had left Nia to perish, she felt a strange unease. The air was thick with tension, and the whispers of the forest seemed louder, as if the trees themselves were warning her. When Amara stepped into the snake farm, the silence was broken by a hiss, a sound far more threatening than any she had heard before. The snakes that she had once used for her own cruel purpose now turned against her. Their eyes gleamed with malice as they slithered toward her, and in that moment, Amara realized her mistake too late. The same snakes that she had once controlled, the same creatures she had used to harm an innocent child, now attacked her. The venomous creatures coiled around her, sinking their fangs into her skin, their venom coursing through her veins. Amara screamed, but it was no use. The snakes, guided by the will of the white python, the spirit guardian, had decided her fate. As Amara's body writhed in pain, the python remained still, its watchful gaze never leaving the scene. The forest had spoken, and justice had been served. The balance had been restored, but at a heavy price. Zawadi's return and Kwame's downfall. Zawadi's journey back to the village had been long, and her heart was heavy with thoughts of her family. She had missed her husband and son dearly, and the time away had given her space to reflect on the growing distance between them. Yet, she could never have anticipated the chaos that awaited her upon her return. As she entered the village, the air felt different, uneasy, heavy with whispers. The usual hum of daily life was absent, replaced by hushed conversations and wary glances. Zawadi stopped at the edge of the village, her instincts telling her that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't long before she overheard a group of women gossiping, their words filled with shock and disbelief. "Did you hear about Amara?" one of them whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "She's gone, vanished, without a trace." Zawadi's pulse quickened. Amara. Her mind raced, memories of the woman she had never fully trusted coming to the forefront. She had always sensed that something was amiss with Amara, but she could never have imagined the treachery that lay hidden behind her charming exterior. "And Nia? Nia should be dead," another woman said, her voice filled with wonder. "But she's alive. Surrounded by those snakes, protected by the spirit of the forest. It's a miracle." Zawadi stood frozen in place, trying to comprehend the gravity of what she was hearing. Amara gone. Nia alive after all that had happened. It seemed impossible. Yet the whispers of the villagers confirmed that something extraordinary had occurred, something far beyond her understanding. Her heart raced as she moved toward her home, desperate to reunite with Nia and get to the bottom of the mystery. At the same time, Kwame was in turmoil. He had spent the last few days in torment, unable to ignore the guilt gnawing at him. The moment he realized what Amara had done to Nia, he knew that he could no longer live with the lies and the betrayal. His actions, driven by lust and greed, had nearly cost him everything. He had failed as a husband, a father, and a man of honor. With dread weighing heavily on his chest, Kwame made his way to the snake farm. His legs felt as though they were made of lead, each step a reminder of the pain he had caused. When he reached the farm, his eyes were drawn immediately to the sight before him. There, on the ground, lay Amara, her lifeless body surrounded by the serpents that had once been her weapons of manipulation. Her skin was pale, and her body was covered in the unmistakable marks of snake bites. The venom had claimed her swiftly, her life snuffed out in the very place she had intended to bring destruction. Her eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of terror and regret. Amara had sought power, but in the end, the forest had claimed its own justice. Kwame knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her cold skin. For a moment, he felt a deep sense of sorrow, not for Amara, but for himself. He had allowed his weakness to lead him down this path, and now he was left with nothing. His affair had torn his family apart, and the woman he had once trusted had paid the ultimate price for his failures. Back in the village, the news of Amara's death spread like wildfire. The villagers gathered, murmuring in hushed tones, each person struggling to make sense of the events that had unfolded. Some saw Amara's death as a form of justice, divine retribution for her cruelty. Others simply felt relief that the dark presence she had cast over the village was gone. But for Kwame, the pain of losing everything began to set in. The weight of his actions, the betrayal of his wife, and the abandonment of his son hung over him like a storm cloud, dark and suffocating. Zawadi arrived at the village square, her heart pounding as she searched for Nia. When she found him, her eyes filled with tears of joy and disbelief. Nia was safe, cradled in the arms of a kind villager, his small face still strict but smiling. She rushed to him, her arms wrapping around him tightly as she whispered words of love and comfort. But as she held him, a cold, familiar presence loomed behind her. Kwame had arrived. His eyes were hollow, his face etched with guilt. Zawadi turned to face him, and for the first time in what felt like ages, their eyes met, not as husband and wife, but as two strangers who had been shattered by the same cruel truth. In front of the entire village, Zawadi spoke, her voice filled with a mixture of grief and rage. She had suffered for too long in silence, enduring the lies, the betrayal, the hurt. No longer would she allow her pain to remain hidden. No longer would she pretend that everything was fine. Kwame, she began, her voice steady but laced with sorrow, you have betrayed me in the worst way possible. You lied to me, you abandoned me, and worst of all, you endangered our child. The villagers fell silent, watching as Zawadi's words pierced the air like a sharp blade. You spent your days in the forest, with that woman, she continued, her eyes locked on his, while I worked tirelessly to care for our home, our family. You let Amara manipulate you, and you allowed her to put our son's life at risk. Kwame's face flushed with shame, but he said nothing. He could not defend himself, there was no excuse for the darkness he had allowed to consume him. Zawadi turned to the villagers, her voice rising with each word. He is not the man you thought he was. He has failed as a husband, as a father, and as a protector of this family. I can no longer stand beside him, and I refuse to let him continue to ruin our lives. The truth hung in the air like an unbearable weight. Kwame, once a proud and respected hunter, now stood before his people as a man broken by his own actions. There would be no redemption for him here, not among these people, and not in the eyes of the woman he had betrayed. As Zawadi turned away, holding Nia close, the villagers began to murmur among themselves. The justice they had long awaited had come, but it was not the kind they had expected. It was a justice of the heart, a truth that could never be erased, a wound that would never heal. And for Kwame, the consequences of his choices were only just beginning. The curse of the snakes. The weight of the truth had shattered Kwame, but now came the consequence. The elders of Tendoji, wise and ancient, gathered in the village center, their faces stern and unreadable. The sun had dipped low in the sky, casting a somber glow over the proceedings. Zawadi, with Nia clutched firmly in her arms, stood off to the side, her eyes hard with the resolve of a woman who had been betrayed but had not been broken. She did not speak, for her silence was a statement in itself. Kwame stood before the elders, stripped of his former dignity. Once a man admired for his strength and courage, he was now reduced to nothing more than a shadow of his former self, a man marked by his own transgressions. The elders, who had long been the keepers of the kingdom's wisdom, did not look at him with pity. Instead, they looked at him with judgment, the kind that came from centuries of experience, from the understanding that every action, no matter how small, had consequences that reached beyond the individual. One elder, his voice low and grave, spoke first. Kwame of Tendoji, he began, his eyes narrowing, you have harbored darkness in your heart, a darkness that has now been exposed. You sought to destroy your family, to tear apart the fabric of our village, all for the sake of your own desires. Kwame's head bowed, unable to meet the eyes of the elder or the village that had once called him a hero. The venom of his betrayal had poisoned everything he had ever stood for, and the punishment for such treachery was unforgiving. You have invited a curse upon yourself, another elder declared, her voice firm. To harbor such dangerous secrets, to lead your family astray, and to endanger the very heart of our community, it is an act that cannot go unpunished. The forest has already given its judgment through the spirit of the white python. But we, too, must ensure that no further darkness stains this land. The elder's words echoed through the village like a death knell, and the villagers gathered around, murmuring their agreement. They, too, had witnessed the miracle of Nia's survival and the tragic end of Amara. They had seen the python's intervention as a sign from the ancestors, an ancient warning that would forever be etched in their hearts. The python had spared Nia, yes, but it had also exacted its own form of justice upon Amara, showing that the forest did not forgive those who sought to destroy its balance. The punishment for your sins is clear, the elder continued. You are hereby banished from this kingdom. You will never set foot in Tendoji again. You will wander the wildlands alone, with only the echoes of your own guilt to guide you. Your name shall be forgotten by all who remain. A cold, suffocating silence settled over the crowd as the elder's words sank in. Kwame had nothing left, no home, no family, no future. His life, once full of promise and pride, was now a barren wasteland. The curse of the snakes had taken its toll, and now he would pay the price for his choices. Zawadi stood, unmoving, as the village elders spoke. Her heart was heavy, but there was no time for grief. She had already mourned the man she once loved, now, she had only one focus, Nia. The little boy, who had been caught in the web of his father's betrayal, needed her more than ever. She had no time for weakness, no room for self-pity. She had to be strong, for Nia, for herself, and for the future she would build without Kwame. She turned her back to the man who had once been her husband, and began the long walk back to her home. The villagers parted to let her pass, their eyes filled with sympathy but also respect. Zawadi had proven herself time and time again to be a woman of resilience, and now, more than ever, she was determined to rebuild her life. The village would support her, and with their help, she would forge a new path for her son. The elders, having delivered their judgment, now turned their attention to the next step, the snake farm. It had long been a source of darkness, a place where treachery and betrayal had taken root. No longer would it stand as a reminder of Kwame's sin. The elders had already decided, the snake farm would be burned to the ground. In a ceremony that felt both cathartic and necessary, the villagers gathered around the snake farm. The flames that consumed the wooden structures crackled and roared, their heat casting long shadows across the land. As the fire spread, the snakes that had once slithered in the cages were driven out, their hisses lost in the roar of the flames. It was a cleansing, an act of purification that would erase the taint of the past. The village would be free of the shadows that had once crept into its heart. Kwame, though far from the village by now, could feel the pull of the fire in his soul. He could not see the flames, but he could sense them. They were a symbol of his destruction, of everything he had lost. His punishment was not just the physical banishment from the village, but the deeper punishment of living with the consequences of his actions. The curse of the snakes had left its mark on him, a scar that would never fade. He wandered the wildlands, aimlessly, with no direction or purpose. The once proud hunter, who had faced down wild beasts and dangerous enemies, was now a broken man, haunted by the ghost of his own choices. He had no family to return to, no home to call his own. All that remained was the endless expanse of the wilderness, stretching out before him like a vast, empty void. The forest, which had once been a place of adventure and pride, now felt like a prison. Every rustling leaf, every distant howl of a creature, reminded him of the choices he had made, the choice to betray his family, to chase after a fleeting desire, to abandon the love that had once meant everything to him. The white python's intervention, the spirit of the forest, had been a cruel reminder that no one could escape the consequences of their actions. The curse of the snakes would follow him for the rest of his life, an ever-present reminder of his downfall. Zawadi, meanwhile, had begun anew. The fire that had destroyed the snake farm had also burned away the past, leaving behind a blank canvas upon which she could rebuild. The village rallied around her, offering support and help as she raised Nia in a home filled with love and strength. The lessons of betrayal and survival were not easily forgotten, but Zawadi knew that she and her son would rise above the darkness that had once threatened to consume them. And so, the tale of Kwame and Zawadi became a story passed down through generations, a tale of love, betrayal, and the harsh consequences of choices made in the heat of passion. The village of Tendoji would never forget the curse of the snakes, nor the lesson they had learned from the spirit of the forest. The balance had been restored, and though the past would never be erased, the future was theirs to shape a new beginning. Time, they say, is a healer. But for Zawadi, time was not just a healer, it was a forge. It shaped her into something unbreakable, something stronger than the woman who had once known only the warmth of her husband's embrace. She had faced the sting of betrayal, the agony of loss, and the terrifying unknown that came with the near destruction of her family. But she had emerged from the fire, not with broken wings, but with a heart more resolute and a spirit more powerful than she could have ever imagined. Zawadi became a living testament to the strength of the human spirit. In her, the village saw not only the scars of pain but also the resilience to rise again. She had faced the darkness, and while she would never forget the wounds, she refused to let them define her. Her unwavering courage and fierce love for her son became a beacon of hope for everyone around her. In a land where stories of old were passed down through the generations, Zawadi's story became one of the most revered and inspiring tale of endurance, of finding light even in the darkest of times. As Nia grew older, he was marked by the experience that had nearly claimed his life. But instead of fear or bitterness, Nia carried with him a profound sense of gratitude and wisdom. He never forgot the night when the mystical python had wrapped its coils around him, protecting him from certain death. That encounter with the divine serpent had ignited a deep connection to the natural world and its many secrets. It was no surprise to anyone when Nia began to show remarkable skills as a healer. With his mother's strength and the serpent's blessing, Nia became a healer unlike any the village had ever known. His touch was gentle yet powerful, capable of curing ailments that had once been deemed untreatable. He learned to use the herbs of the forest, the rhythms of nature, and the ancient healing arts that had been passed down by the elders. But it was his heart, his ability to listen to the needs of others, that truly set him apart. People from far and wide sought his help, and Nia never turned anyone away. The story of the Mistress and the serpent's revenge spread across the kingdom of Tendoji and beyond. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the consequences of greed, jealousy, and betrayal. The villagers never spoke of Amara without shuddering, but they also made sure to remember the lesson her treachery had taught them. Kwame's downfall was a stark reminder that no one was above the laws of nature, no matter how mighty they might seem. But it was the serpent's revenge, the way it had shown mercy to Nia and punishment to Amara, that resonated most deeply with the people. It was a reminder that balance would always be restored, that no evil deed could go unpunished, and that the ancestors, in their infinite wisdom, would always find a way to right the wrongs of the world. Zawadi's strength was not just honored by her family and the villagers, but by the entire kingdom. As years passed, Zawadi earned the respect of the people, and her wisdom became invaluable to the next generation. Her story, woven into the fabric of the village, was recounted at every gathering, every festival, and every moment of reflection. Zawadi was no longer just a mother or a wife, she was an elder, one who had seen the worst of what life had to offer and had emerged victorious. Her voice, steady and wise, carried weight in the village council, and her opinions shaped the direction of Tendoji. She became a symbol of resilience, a woman who had endured the worst, yet refused to be broken. As the years rolled on, the kingdom of Tendoji began to thrive. The wounds of the past had healed, and a sense of peace reigned. The people lived in harmony with the land, understanding the delicate balance that governed their world. With Nia's healing gifts, the village prospered, and the knowledge of the ancestors was passed down to the next generation. The shadows that had once threatened to destroy everything were gone, leaving only the light of hope and the promise of a better future. And as for the mystical python, the creature that had protected Nia and punished Amara, its role in the village's fate was never forgotten. It was believed that the spirit of the python still watched over the kingdom, a silent guardian whose presence was felt in the wind, in the rustle of the leaves, and in the whispers of the forest. But the python was never seen again, its purpose fulfilled, its lesson taught. The people of Tendoji knew that the serpent's disappearance was no sign of weakness, it was a mark of completion. The balance had been restored, the lesson had been learned, and the land was safe once more. The python had come not to rule, but to teach, and now, with its departure, it left behind a kingdom forever changed. Its legacy would live on in the hearts of the people, in the strength of Zawadi and Nia, and in the wisdom of the elders. In the end, it was not just the kingdom of Tendoji that flourished. It was the spirit of the people, people who had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, people who had learned that no betrayal, no matter how deep, could ever break the unyielding will of a heart that refused to give up. Zawadi had found a new beginning, and with her son by her side, she helped build a legacy of hope, resilience, and wisdom that would last for generations to come. And as the sun set over the village of Tendoji, casting long golden shadows across the land, the spirit of the python, forever a protector, was at peace.